Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. Over the past year, this podcast has continued to grow, and I want to begin by welcoming everyone who has recently joined the show. Whether you've been listening since the beginning, or you just discovered the podcast, thank you for being here and for helping build this incredible community. I'm taking a short break before returning in September with, believe it or not, we're up to season 4. And that's where we'll be sharing new topics, new insights, and deeper conversations about narcissism, personality, and high conflict relationships. I'm really excited to get into all of that with you. In the meantime, while I'm away, I thought it would be fun to revisit the 2 most downloaded episodes of 2026. Today, we're counting down with the second most listened to episode of the year, and next week I'll be back with the number 1 most downloaded episode. Interestingly, if we look beyond this year, the second most downloaded episode in the history of the Narcissism Decoder is episode 59, How to Navigate Vulnerable Narcissism, the True Meaning of Empathy. That's episode 59, as I mentioned, if you want to check that one out. But since I'm focusing on the more recent content, today's second most downloaded episode is Covert Narcissism Explained, Why Validation Feels Like Survival. And it's actually part of our, you remember this, and I always quote it, Consolidation Series. You may remember, or for those of you who are new to the show, the Consolidation Series are full episodes that I create in response to the thoughtful questions so many of you send me. One thing that I've learned is that not everyone wants new information all the time. Many of you also want the opportunity to revisit important concepts, connect the dots, and understand them on a deeper level. I've really enjoyed creating these episodes, and based on your responses, the Consolidation Series will definitely continue in season 4, as long as you keep the questions coming. So feel free to email them to me. As always, my email address is in the show notes below. So let's revisit the second most downloaded episode of 2026, Covert Narcissism Explained. And don't forget to join me next week as we count down to the number 1 episode of the year. For those of you who have been following along, you know we've been covering a lot of ground lately. We've explored lying, secrecy, and living a double life. And I just wrapped up a series comparing borderline and narcissistic personality organizations, which many of you have reached out about. I've heard your request to continue that conversation, and I'm seriously considering it because I really enjoyed pushing more deeply into the diagnostic distinctions and into what those differences actually mean in real relationships. Before moving into another full series, I thought this would be a good time to, and I'm quoting this, consolidate our gains. I've received a number of thoughtful listener questions, and they actually offer a perfect opportunity to pull some of these themes together, to slow down, reflect, and think more deeply about what we've been building. A sincere thank you to those of you who have taken the time to write in. Your questions are nuanced, personal, and psychologically sophisticated. Please keep them coming. They help shape the direction of this podcast more than you may realize. So, this episode begins what we might call, and I'm quoting again, a consolidation series. I was tempted to label this as a Q&A, but that doesn't quite capture what we do here. I'm not offering definitive answers or quick solutions. What I can offer are formulations, ways of thinking psychodynamically about the questions you're living with. The goal isn't certainty, it's psychological depth, nuance, and integration. It's helping you see the emotional logic underneath the surface of your behaviors. My hope is not to close the conversation, but to deepen it and open it up further. Hence why I'm not referring to this necessarily as a Q&A, again, as if I have one definitive answer. So, in each of these consolidation episodes, we'll take one question at a time and use it as a doorway back into the core issues we've been exploring: defenses, identity, attachment, shame, rage, mourning, just to name a few, and the struggle to develop a more integrated and authentic self. Let's begin with our first question. Let me start with a question that captures the spirit of several emails I've received. Many of you write very thoughtful and often quite detailed messages. I'm going to paraphrase here, both to keep things concise and to protect anonymity. But the heart of it goes something like this. Hello, I've listened to your episode on covert narcissism, and you discuss a patient who's struggling with failing out of law school and has difficulty with relationships, particularly with her mother. You state, now I'm quoting here because this listener quoted me, it's important to remember that covert narcissism involves a deep seated need to feel validated and understood, often as a result of early narcissistic wounds. Unquote. So here's the rest of the question. But wouldn't any person in therapy wish to feel validated and understood? What specifically makes this a covert narcissistic trait? I want to thank the listener for such a careful and well considered question. You're absolutely right to point out that the wish to feel validated and understood is universal. Any person entering therapy or any relationship brings that hope with them. What distinguishes covert narcissism is not the presence of the wish, but the role it plays in maintaining psychic equilibrium. In covert narcissistic functioning, validation is not simply desired, it becomes structurally necessary. I'm putting emphasis here, you may hear it, but on the word necessary. It's necessary to maintain a psychic equilibrium and to prevent collapse into shame, worthlessness, or profound inadequacy. When validation is absent, the experience is not just disappointment or frustration, it's often felt as an injury. In other words, for many patients, feeling understood supports growth. For the covert narcissistic patient, feeling understood is often a prerequisite for psychological survival. Without it, the capacity to reflect, to think about oneself, or to tolerate tension, difference, and conflict can quickly give way to withdrawal, defensiveness, or quiet, that's the covert part, quiet rage. And those defenses are often subtle. Instead of open rage or overt grandiosity, you may see passive aggressive comments, backhanded compliments that subtly diminish the other, remarks designed to induce guilt, or insinuations that leave you feeling as though you've done something wrong. The injury, again, the injury is not feeling constantly validated and understood, but the injury is managed not through direct confrontation, but through indirect control, restoring equilibrium, restoring self esteem by destabilizing the other person. In the clinical example I described, the difficulty was not that the patient wanted understanding, but that her sense of self became organized around securing it. Over time, repeatedly relying on validation in this way subtly organizes the personality. What begins as a need for understanding gradually shapes how the person interacts with others. Over time, this does not necessarily produce overt demands for admiration or obvious grandiosity. Instead, it shapes a personality structure marked by hypersensitivity to perceived slights. There's a chronic sense of being unseen or misunderstood, and a quiet preoccupation with how one is being regarded. Self-worth becomes precarious. In other words, it is tied to recognition. meaning that the person feels steady and intact when they feel understood, but quickly deflated or injured when they do not. Yet, this need for validation is rarely expressed directly. Rather than letting a loved one know, and I'm quoting here, like this is hypothetically, I need reassurance or I feel hurt, the person may withdraw, become subtly critical, or communicate disappointment in indirect ways, all in an unconscious attempt to do what? To restore the sense of being seen and affirmed. So the trait is not the wish itself, but the way that the wish feels non negotiable. It's rigid, urgent, and anxiety laden rather than flexible, mutual, and part of a reciprocal relationship. In other words, what makes this covert narcissism is that the need to be understood is not just a hope or a desire like it is for most people. It becomes essential to the person's sense of self. And I'll say more about that momentarily. One way to think about the distinction clinically is this. In healthier personality organization, the wish to be understood can survive misunderstanding and to some degree non-recognition. A person may feel hurt, frustrated, or disappointed, but their sense of self and their self-esteem and their identity, right? All of this remains intact. They do not feel erased. In covert narcissistic functioning, however, misunderstanding or a lack of acknowledgement of how intelligent, gifted, empathic, or special one believes oneself to be is often experienced not simply as disappointment, but as exposure or even erasure in more severe cases. Exposure is the sense that the person feels suddenly seen as ordinary or flawed or insufficient, as though the carefully protected image of the self has been pierced. Erasure, that's in the more extreme case, and you've heard me talk about this, by the way, in the Borderline series, but erasure in the sense that without recognition, they feel they do not quite register in the other person's mind at all, as if they psychologically disappear. In that moment, validation is not just about comfort or soothing. It's about restoring a threatened sense of existence. And when that restoration does not come through reassurance or attunement, you may unconsciously try to reconstitute yourself by what? By diminishing the other through subtle put downs, inducing guilt, highlighting their flaws, withdrawing emotionally, or making them feel small, inadequate, ashamed, or somehow at fault. In doing so, you momentarily lift yourself up. Even though it's only temporary, it still feels good. So, what makes this covert narcissism is that validation is required not for connection, but for self-cohesion. And again, you've heard me mention the fragmented sense of self multiple times in prior episodes, but the validation holds that together. This reliance on validation reveals a deeper vulnerability. The self feels precarious, not merely hurt, when recognition is absent. Just to drive home the point, the other person must constantly recognize and affirm you in order for you and the relationship to feel psychologically safe. So, in short, the issue is not that the person wants to feel understood. We all do. The issue is that without it, the self feels at risk of collapse, and the relationship becomes organized around preventing that collapse. I appreciate you taking the time to listen so carefully and to raise such an important distinction and question. I hope this makes clear that, in covert narcissism, wanting to feel understood goes beyond ordinary validation. It becomes essential for maintaining the self and the self-esteem and one's identity and shaping how the person interacts with others. Okay, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this new, and again, I'm quoting, consolidation episode. Please let me know what you think. I'll be doing a few more of these in the coming weeks. As always, continue to send me your questions and observations. I may use them in a future episode. I read all your comments, and I truly appreciate them. If this spoke to you and you're curious to learn more about all issues related to narcissism, please support the show by subscribing so you don't miss what's coming next. And even more importantly, take a moment to leave a review. Reviews make the podcast easier for others to find, which helps the show grow. The more the show grows, the more I can invest in creating thoughtful content that supports you in understanding and navigating your experiences with narcissism. Okay, thanks for being here with me. I'm grateful we got to explore this one together. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.